On my 67th birthday, the day that should have been filled with happiness, my daughter sent me to a nursing home. In my hands, I still held the birthday cake I hadn't even blown the candles on, while she coldly said, "Mom, I can't take care of you anymore. To me, you're already dead." The moment the door closed behind her, I knew I had lost more than just my freedom. I had lost the very child I had spent my whole life loving and sacrificing for. But they forgot one thing. I am not the weak woman they think I am. I stayed silent for too long, and in that silence, I learned how to rise again, to give life back exactly what it owed me, with intelligence, calmness, and a plan they would never see coming. This is the story of a mother, betrayed and abandoned, who turned her pain into power. Stay until the end, because you won't believe what my daughter learned when it was already too late. After my husband died, the old seaside mansion became my whole world. But not a world filled with gentle memories. It became a place where loneliness, cold, and darkness crept into every corner. Each morning when I woke, the pale sunlight filtered through dust-covered curtains, as if to remind me that I had truly lost everything. It was only me and the steady sound of the antique clock. Its ticking was a reminder that time waits for no one, not even those who once walked hand in hand through half a life. But that emptiness was more than loneliness. It was an invisible trap where every movement, every small sound grew suspicious. I began to notice strange things. A painting slightly askew, a chair not in its usual place, or simply my husband's scent, once plain and familiar, becoming foreign, as if the house were hiding a secret I had never known. At first, I told myself it was only grief after the funeral making my mind sensitive, but then that feeling thickened and grew heavy, like someone watching me from behind the walls, silently tracking every step, every breath. I walked down the long hallway, my hand brushing the cold walls, a shiver crawling up my spine. The windows opened to the sea, where the waves' hush that used to soothe the soul now only echoed emptiness, reminding me of memories that I alone still held. Every family photograph on the wall, from my husband's radiant smile to my child's innocent eyes, seemed to taunt me, "Mother, do you still have the strength to stand?" At night, the sea wind swept through the trees and the doors groaned as though the house knew my thoughts. I wondered, after everything, whether anyone truly loved me anymore, or if only memories and hidden betrayals remained. Once, I heard whispering, unclear and coming from nowhere, like two shadows talking about something I was not allowed to know. My heart clenched. But instead of fear, a small flame was kindled. I would no longer be easy prey. I would watch, stay silent, and learn how to take revenge. I remembered my husband once saying, "Life can be unfair, but never forget yourself." Those words now shone like a faint light in the dark. I began to pay attention to the smallest details. A key moved from where it belonged. The calendar pages disturbed, old letters unopened. Each sign was a clue, and I knew that sooner or later the truth would be revealed. I would not let anyone steal from me what was mine, not with force, but with the intelligence and patience of someone who had loved and lost. I climbed the stairs and looked out at the sea through the large window where moonlight silvered the calm water. The waves whispered, calling back the nights my husband and I sat together and spoke of the future, of our children. Now all of that was gone, and only I remained, my heart burning with resolve. Whoever dared betray me would pay in ways they never expected. That night I sat at my desk, opened old letters and journals, and began to record every detail. Each page became a piece of the plan. I did not shout or sob. I watched in silence and prepared. I knew my daughter and my son would soon realize. Their mother, the woman they once thought weak, was no longer the same. I am Linda, a woman who knows how to wait, who knows how to observe, and who is ready to turn pain into power. And from that moment, I knew the game had only just begun. That night, after recording every detail, I left my desk and sat by the window overlooking the sea. The waves still lapped and whispered, reminding me that time never stops. I knew the next steps had to be taken with caution. Outsiders might think I was weak, grieving the loss of my husband, but in my mind, the pieces of the revenge plan were already falling into place. I took a deep breath and told myself, the game has only just begun, and anyone who dares to underestimate me will pay. The next morning, I heard a car stop at the gate. My 2 children, Elena and Daniel, arrived, stepping inside with bright smiles and eyes full of the fake concern I'd grown all too familiar with. They hugged me, asked about my health, about the days I'd spent alone in the cold mansion. I answered with a small smile, but inside I recognized, behind that sweetness lay a clever and dangerous plot. Elena, with her confident, sparkling eyes, said she wanted to help me manage the estate, while Daniel nodded slightly, his deep voice full of feigned sincerity. They talked about contracts, documents, and plans that seemed aimed only at caring for their mother. But their glances revealed a truth I could not ignore. They were calculating every opportunity to claim the house, the place bound to my whole life, the place holding my husband's and my own memories. I watched them, taking in every detail, every movement. The way Elena held her teacup with exaggerated care, the way Daniel casually touched the rug as if assessing every stitch. All of it felt like warning signs. Part of me, the mother who loves her children, still wanted to believe they were merely lost kids. But the other part of me, the seasoned woman who reads people and analyzes, had seen the truth. This was a battle, and I could not afford to lose. I began to pretend to be even weaker, letting them believe this old mother would be easy to manipulate. I agreed to let them check the papers, to let them assume the right to help me. But in the silence I observed, memorized every detail, every word, every look. Each of their actions was a piece of the revenge plan I was assembling. At night, when they left the house to sleep, I sat in the living room, moonlight streaming through the window and reflecting on the polished wooden table. I opened my notebook and wrote everything down, the false smiles, the offhand remarks that revealed a plot, the way they walked through each room to gauge the value of the house. I told myself, they have no idea that their mother, the woman they think is weak, is quietly preparing everything to turn their greed into a humiliating defeat. The next morning, Elena brought coffee up to my room, her voice syrup sweet. "Mother, I want to help you sort the papers and the property."
We can do it together, can't we?
I nodded, smiled kindly, but my eyes were as cold as ice. Daniel stood behind her, watching me, wearing a smile that was both caring and probing, inadvertently revealing his interest in the valuables around the living room. I knew they had begun to see the opportunity, and I also knew that with a single wrong step they would lose everything. But if I was clever, they would hand everything to me without realizing it. Days passed, and I continued to feign fatigue and frailty so they would feel confident. But in my mind, every move of theirs was being calculated. I had lost my husband, but not my wits. I would not let the house, the life's legacy of my husband and me, fall into the hands of the greedy. I began to feel a strange excitement. My children's scheme, if exploited at the right moment, would become the weapon of revenge I had been nurturing for so long.
And so the following days went by in a tense but fake atmosphere, where maternal love seemed to remain but had in truth become a battlefield of wits. I, the mother once thought weak, was now learning to observe, to plan, to turn pain and betrayal into power and strategy. One thing was clear: the darkness in this house would soon reveal the truth, and anyone who dared to underestimate their mother would regret it for the rest of their lives. That morning, after Elena and Daniel left following a formal lunch full of care, I was left with an inexplicable, heavy feeling. They had asked to look through the papers, calling it tidying things up, and I, whether foolish or deliberate, had agreed. I pretended to be tired so they would feel reassured that this old mother would not intervene. They smiled, hugged, and promised they would take care of everything. I watched their backs disappear down the road in front of the house, then turned back into the study, where the old wooden desk still held the lingering smell of my husband's cigarettes, and the papers were yellowed with time. Something urged me, an intuition, or perhaps the call of my pride, to open the drawer where I had hidden the important documents I had long avoided touching. I gently pulled the drawer out, my hand hesitating as it brushed an old envelope. At first, I meant only to glance at the terms of the property contract and put it back, but my eyes stopped on another sheet, a stamped document, handwriting smudged in places as if it had been wiped or altered. I turned it over slowly, holding my breath, as if I could hear my own heart pounding in the silent room. It was the will. The original will I believed my husband had signed years ago, when we were still healthy and still trusted one another completely. But the signature at the bottom looked clumsy, as if added later. The line heir did not bear my name. Daniel. That name appeared cold and accusatory before my eyes, like a dreadful verdict. I read it again and again, feeling as though every sound around me had been strangled. I remembered the years with my husband, his laughter, our talks about the future. There was no way he would abandon me with such a clumsy scrawl. I turned the pages, searching for signs of forgery. Different ink, swapped seals, anything that showed the document had been tampered with. Then I saw it. A streak of blurred ink in one place, a break in the lettering, a spot that looked like it had been scraped away and rewritten. My heart skipped. Rage, pain, and a cold resolve rose within me. Not tears, but a ruthless determination. I recalled Elena's look when she said, "Mother, let me help you." Eyes filled with greed hidden behind a gentle smile. I remembered Daniel's hand casually nudging the calendar as if to check what timing would suit their move. All the small details I had been recording snapped together into a clear picture. They had not come out of love. They had come to alter my fate with forged words, and if they dared to touch the will, the most sacred thing of our married life, then they had prepared everything to seize it. The paperwork, the witnesses, and the silence of those who would carry it out. I did not shout or make a scene. I set the paper down, washed my face, and let my fury turn into strategy. Revenge, I thought, did not have to be loud. Subtle, well-prepared retribution is what destroys people. I needed evidence, an ally, and the right moment. I needed details they would not expect, an authentic signature, a copy of the will kept somewhere safe, traces showing who altered the document. I needed Brian, my husband's close friend, the only person I could suspect might still hold some loyalty to our past. But I would not call him right away, for any hurried contact would put Elena and Daniel on alert. A plan flared up inside me. Be silent, observe, gather. I would let them think their scheme had succeeded, so they would relax and reveal themselves. I would let them expose their greed through careless acts, so that, piece by piece, the evidence would fall into my hands. They would not see their mother as an opponent because they had already put me in the box labeled frail old woman. They were wrong. I folded the will, returned it to its place, but this time before shutting the drawer, I photographed it. I wrote a short note in bold ink, the date, the time, the things I had seen, then hid the pen and the phone where only I would know.
That small action made me feel I had regained control. The pain was still there, but it was no longer a weakness. It was the fuel for a fire I would use to burn away every falsehood. I left the study and walked slowly down the hall toward the sea. The waves still crashed as if utterly indifferent to human plots. I swallowed my pain, closed my heart, and whispered to myself, "Everything is just beginning." From that moment on, every step I took was calculated, every word a veil, and every look I gave was stored away for the day of reckoning.
That evening, after discovering the altered will, I knew this was no longer a simple family matter. The next steps had to be careful, not rushed. I sat silently in the study, the old paper still in my hand, my gaze fixed on the distant sea. The waves whispered gently, but inside me another storm was rising, a storm of fury, betrayal, and the quiet will for revenge. I knew that if I let Elena and Daniel go on unchecked, they would continue, step by step, quietly turning this house into their own, and I would lose everything that belonged to my past and my future. And then, as if by fate, Brian appeared. He stood at the gate, still tall, his back slightly bent with the years, but those eyes of his, the eyes that had watched me silently since long ago, were still heavy with observation. Brian, my husband's close friend, the man I had once thought to be only a memory of days gone by, now became the only person who could understand this complex situation. He stepped in carrying an old scent, the smell of the past, the scent of words unsaid and quiet feelings buried for decades. I stood there, my heart aching, surprised, afraid, and yet struck by a glimmer of hope. He did not come to comfort or soothe my grief. Brian looked straight into my eyes, his voice low like the night waves. "Carol, I know what's happening. Your two children, they are no longer the ones you once loved. They are calculating, and if you're not careful, everything will vanish in an instant." I held my breath, feeling the truth in every word. I knew he was not lying. He had loved me silently, understood me more than anyone, and now he was the only one warning me about the scheme of my own children. We sat down, the weak desk lamp throwing a pale light across Brian's aged yet still sharp face. He told me about the signs he had observed, how Daniel looked at the silver box in the room, how Elena forced a smile when the topic of property ownership came up, and the supposedly casual remarks that were really tests, probing the limits of an old mother. Those little details to me suddenly became vivid and more terrifying than ever. I tasted betrayal, a bitter flavor like sea salt spreading through my chest. Brian advised, "Stay silent, watch, and don't rush to react. Your children will reveal their greed. The more you let them think you are weak, the more their true faces will show. Then you won't have to attack. You will simply harvest." I looked at him, my heart pounding. Hearing that advice, I felt both heavy and strangely exhilarated. I had been waiting for this moment, the moment to turn fury into a perfect strategy. We talked for hours. He told me about my husband's past, about how Daniel and Elena had always regarded the estate, about the traps they had unwittingly set. Every word from Brian was a vital piece that helped me see the full picture of the conspiracy I had only guessed at before. I realized my caution, patience, and intellect would be the most powerful weapons, not sudden anger or tears. When night fell, I stood with Brian and looked out at the sea in silence. The waves reminded me that time was passing, that the plan had to begin, but every step had to be exact. I knew I was not alone, that Brian would be my secret ally, helping me observe without arousing Elena and Daniel's suspicion. And under the silver moonlight that draped the old mansion, I drew a deep breath, feeling each beat of my heart. A cold determination flared within me. Whoever dares underestimate their mother will pay with their own greed.
I smiled. But this smile was not the smile of a gentle mother.
It was the smile of someone betrayed, who had now found an ally and was ready to turn every plot against her into a blade that would cut the enemy. I whispered to myself, everything is just beginning, but this time I will hold every control. That night, after Brian left with his promise to watch calmly, the house seemed to swallow every sound. I sat alone by the large window where the moon drifted across the sea and felt an unusual calm. Not peace, but the cold focus of someone plotting. I knew the coming days would be the final test. Who was sincere and who was merely acting? And the storm arrived as if by fate, providing a curtain for all the secret deeds. The wind came first, not strong, but enough to rustle the trees and wake memories of rainy nights when my husband was still alive. Then the rain slammed down, pouring as if the sky itself were emptying, the glass rattling in its frames, the roof groaning in the chest of the house. The old seaside mansion suddenly felt fragile in the fury of nature. I sat there, listening to each gust whisper the names of those who had betrayed me, feeling like the only person who kept their wits amid the madness. Elena and Daniel stayed in the house all afternoon, both showing an unusual attentiveness. Elena draped a scarf over my shoulders, her voice sweet as toffee. "Don't worry, Mother. I'll stay through the night. You need someone with you while the storm hits." Daniel chimed in, half joking, half concerned, patting my shoulder with the gesture they always used when trying to hide something. I let them think this old mother still needed guarding. But listening, that was the first weapon. I heard the rustle of raincoats, the soft clink of cups, and above all, I heard whispers, very small, slipping through the layers of storm sound like a sharp knife. When Elena told me to rest, she and Daniel left the living room and walked quietly down the hall. I sat still, staring at their backs until their silhouettes vanished behind a door. Then I pretended to doze on the sofa, but my ears and mind stayed awake. From the far end of the hall came two whispers. At first they sounded like wind. Then the words became clear. The right time. Sell the house. When? Mother no longer recognizes its worth. Daniel's voice was low and calculating. Elena laughed softly, honeyed. We just need to be patient a few more months. Everything will go smoothly. Don't rush. Let Mother rest. Then we do it all. Tears fell from my eyes, not from fear, but from the brutal recognition. The child I had raised and taught was discussing selling the home my husband and I had painstakingly built. The salty drops mixed with the rain outside, as if the sea mourned with me. But the tears slid off. Instead, a layer of ice formed over my heart. From the depths rose something cold and hard as steel. I realized I could not keep crying. The tears had turned into resolve. I rose and moved slowly, following their footsteps like someone accidental. But each step was calculated. The floorboards creaked softly, the rain beating on the windows like drum beats announcing something. When they reached the next room, I overheard key phrases that chilled me. Sell as soon as we have the paperwork. Arrange it with the broker we know. They spoke about money, about clearing out the estate, as if listing items to discard memories. Each phrase stabbed me like a needle, but that pain fed the slow-burning fire of revenge inside me. I remembered Brian's words, stay silent and observe. That advice rang clear over the wind's howl. If I reacted with tears or shouting, they'd know I was serious, and they would retreat, hiding every piece of evidence. But now, in the eye of the storm, when sky and earth conspired together, I chose silence. Silence was not surrender. It was strategy. I would let them reveal themselves. Let what they intended to do expose them. They would think this old mother only cried,
They would rush to realize their ambitions, forgetting that every move they made left traces. Wind shrieked through the door gaps, snuffing out a candle on the table, and darkness spread like a carpet. In that dark, I watched their every movement, the red light on Elena's phone flashing as she texted, Daniel's hand on the property map as if calculating. I rummaged for old ledgers, receipts my late husband had kept, searching for anything that could prove the original will had existed, that my name was the one that should have been on it. I quietly noted who had visited the house recently, who had entered the study, and who had shown an unusual interest in the silver box. Everything would be a clue. The rage within me ceased to be a scream. It became cold precision, step by step, move by move. I imagined Elena and Daniel in another room dividing the money, then looking up to find their mother standing there, not the feeble woman they expected, but a woman who had watched, knew every trick, and knew how to turn the board. In that vision, my smile was faint but certain. My revenge would not be force. It would be exposure, a performance that, in the end, would restore to me what was mine. The rain tapered off, then stopped, leaving a damp, silent atmosphere, like the calm after battle. I wiped my face dry, reapplied my lipstick, a small, absurd gesture, but full of intent, and returned to the room. My steps were light but steady. They may have thought the storm had loosened their moral boundaries, but it was the storm that had stripped them bare. And when dawn came, I would begin collecting the pieces, the whispers from the stormy night, the messages sent at 2 a.m, the small transactions overlooked. Piece by piece, they would form the evidence.
Looking out the window where the sea lay pale under a thin sun, I smiled. The smile of someone who had suffered enough. The tears had fallen. Now it was time for the heart to harden and do its work. And I knew for certain, Elena and Daniel had stepped into an arena they did not understand, where every step was being recorded. They had crawled into their own trap, and I, their mother, would patiently wait until the net closed tight. The stormy night had passed like a quiet reminder. Everything in the house remained intact in form, yet, deep within the relationships, everything had been shaken. The next morning, while Elena and Daniel still slept after a night of scheming, I woke earlier than usual, not from sleeplessness, but because a smoldering decision had ripened in my heart. It was time to go through my husband's study, the room holding the most treasured memories, as if sifting through the past to know where I stood. I opened the door, inhaling the familiar scents: tobacco, old paper, and the echoes of nights my husband and I spent talking together. The silence was so profound that the ticking of the clock on the bedside table echoed like a whisper. Search, Carol, don't let anyone deny his memory. I began my meticulous sorting, moving deliberately, aware that haste could reveal more than necessary. Every photograph I lifted told a story. Our wedding smiles, our children with sand-strewn hair after a day at the beach, my husband's tender gaze on a sunny afternoon. My hands shook, not from weakness, but from the weight of pent-up emotion. I organized books, opened drawers, and then, when lifting a small wooden panel that seemed unusual, a faded patch spot I had previously dismissed as age, my fingers touched a narrow gap, just wide enough to probe. It felt like a hand guiding me, as if the sea had pushed a clue my way amidst the waves. Using a screwdriver, I carefully removed the panel, revealing a small silver box hidden within the wall, like a secret my husband wanted to keep for just the two of us. My heart raced. The box was lighter than expected, but inside lay an entire world of memories. A yellowed leather-bound journal, unseen family photos, and a tiny USB stick. A modern puzzle piece. I touched the journal. The smell of old paper stung, reminding me of time long past. My eyes skimmed the entries.
My husband's handwriting fluid, dipping at moments, pausing as if holding secrets just for himself. I sat down and opened the journal, reading line by line. The pages revealed not just daily life, but his innermost thoughts. Love for me, concerns about the future, and subtle suspicions about recent changes in the family. Some passages detailed that he had drafted a will and safely stored the original, including a line written with unmistakable clarity. If one day I am gone, may Carol remain calm and understand who is sincere. It struck me like an arrow to the heart. He had anticipated this, had prepared. I lifted the USB beside the journal, hands slightly trembling, but mind sharp. In that moment, past and present converged. The photos evoked memories. The USB potentially held the modern proof I needed. I inserted it into my laptop, heart pausing briefly before resuming like a machine. Files appeared, scanned photos, audio recordings, a PDF labeled will_original.pdf. I opened it, unable to believe my eyes. There it was, the original will. My husband's handwriting unmistakable. The ink even, the heir clearly named Linda. The room seemed to hold its breath. I read it over and over. Every word was undeniable proof. They had tampered, but now evidence existed, and an entire plot aimed at changing it lay exposed. Yet the stark truth did not bring only vindication. It ignited a righteous fury within me. Who dared touch my husband's will? Who tried to erase my name from a life he had spent building? Questions crashed through me like relentless waves. A natural urge to scream, to confront Elena and Daniel rose, but Brian's voice echoed in my mind. Silence. Observe. That advice became armor, shielding the decisions I needed to make. I returned everything to the box but did not close it immediately. I photographed every page, every photo, every file on the USB, storing copies in a secret backup known only to me. These small acts were pieces in the larger frame of strategy. I could not let emotion override me. Pain had to transform into plan. The choice of silence was born deep within. Silence to observe, to wait, to let the traitors reveal themselves. If I rushed, they'd be alert. If I let them feel secure, their greed and traces would slowly emerge. I washed my hands, looking into the mirror. The reflection was sharper, more precise, like a finely honed blade. I contemplated the next steps, creating opportunities for them to reveal their path of greed, verifying who had tampered with the will, finding allies to stand with me when the time came. Brian was one, but more were needed. Legal proof, a plan to make Elena and Daniel believe they had won before crushing them with truth. I smiled, a smile without mercy, only preparation. They had given me clues, and I would turn those clues into the perfect strike of revenge. When I closed the wall compartment, the faint click sounded like an oath. The silver box would be the heart of the plan, the will copy its nucleus of justice restored. I did not shout, did not plead. I chose silence, and within that silence, I began to stage a play in which Elena and Daniel would star, actors unwittingly turning themselves into guilty parties. My heart was no longer soft as water. It had turned to stone, cold and directed, and in that moment, under the pale morning sun by the seaside, I whispered to myself, "The time has come, but let them think the old mother still knows nothing." The morning after returning the silver box to its hiding place, I walked down the hallway as if performing a well-rehearsed play. Slow steps, hoarse voice, eyes half closed as though forgetful. They wanted to see a fragile, feeble mother, and I gave them exactly that image, for in my script, Feigned weakness was the perfect mask. Elena hugged me that morning, whispering, "Rest, Mother. I'll take care of everything." Daniel adjusted a pillow behind my back, his hand brushing lightly, as if both careful and calculating. Their eyes glimmered with the certainty of victory. I shivered, not from fear, but because their delight in scheming fueled the cold fire within me. I let them act, letting them believe the control of the estate was in their young hands. I signed minor authorization papers, stamped them, mumbled vague reassurances. This old mother is too frail to worry about complicated documents. They smiled, embraced, whispered thanks to fate for such an easy gift.
But beneath my thin maternal veil, I'd woven an invisible network, a plan they could not suspect, built in silence, with the steady steps of a life long lived prudently. Over the next few days, they proudly flaunted their management of the estate, adjusting contracts, granting brokers permission to view the house, listing items for sale, even planning the clearing out of old keepsakes. They forgot that I was listening to every word, memorizing every raised brow. By day, while they busied themselves with minor transactions, I quietly completed other work, contacting my husband's old lawyer, a trusted guardian of his wishes, opening the Dennis Fund, named for my late husband, solemn yet discreet, transferring all real assets, deeds, shares, savings, into the fund, using legal procedures that only the astute would notice. Each transfer I signed was carefully sealed, like stitches securing what I refused to lose.
They believed they held the keys, but in truth, every key was in my hands, not through show, but through legal paths I had long prepared. I knew revenge required more than outrage. It demanded wisdom, steps that would expose them without their knowledge. The Dennis Fund was that beautiful trap, legally impeccable, unremarkable from the outside, yet the real repository of all value. As Elena and Daniel gleefully listed items for sale, I quietly backed up documents, scheduled transfers, and delayed minor steps with small excuses, a signature verification, a copy check, leaving them waiting and moving only on the schedule I allowed. I could see moments of unmasked greed in their eyes. Elena eagerly listing who would buy the antique piano. Daniel calculating how to divide money. I smiled inwardly, a smile of quiet triumph. The things they gleefully sold were mere bait. The original ownership, the legal evidence, safely in the Dennis Fund, untouchable. They could sell, discard photos, but not what carried legal power. Deeds, official contracts, bank accounts, all carefully redirected under my watchful preparation. At night, when the house was still, I sat at my desk, glancing at the signed authorization papers, and smiled quietly, not out of personal pleasure, but because I understood the unfolding script. They thought they had won, while I had secured every stake, careful, discreet, fully in control. Brian visited, nodding as I reported the news. Good. Silence remains the strongest weapon. His words were a victorious, ironic hymn, yet I knew the game was far from over. The plan was only reaching the stage where Elena and Daniel would attack themselves with their own ambition. I still feigned fatigue, letting them sense the ease of early victory. They embraced, dreaming of wealth, while I, under my old name, had transformed all inheritance into the Dennis Fund, a source of aid for widows and nurses, as my mother once dreamed. When the time came, I would need no disputes, no grand scheming to reclaim anything. All legal paths, all evidence, were ready to expose the truth. And then, Elena and Daniel would learn what they could never have imagined. The mother they thought emotionally dead was the one holding the power of life and death over the fate they so greedily pursued. The next morning, I lingered before the mirror longer than usual, not to admire myself, but to study whether the face I performed was convincing enough. I had perfected the role of the frail, weary mother, hoarse voice, slow steps, dazed eyes. Elena and Daniel embraced, lost in the joy of thinking power and inheritance were in their hands. Little did they know, in that very moment of letting their guard down, I was preparing a decisive move. To leave the house, leave a short note, and disappear. Not out of fear, but as a deliberate rebirth. I set the pen down and wrote a few simple lines. Mother needs time to rest and reflect. Don't worry about me. I'll return when I feel better. The note was short, without blame or dramatic tears. Perfect to ease their minds while arousing no suspicion. I folded it carelessly on the table and quietly locked the door behind me, leaving the house and a play they thought they had won. Each step I took carried cold determination. No one was to know my whereabouts, and every moment away would be devoted to sharpening my mind, refining strategy, and learning what I lacked. The villa shrinking behind me did not weaken my heart. On the contrary, it urged me to turn pain into action. I descended into the city, rented a tiny room in alleyways I had never dared to enter before. There, I slept on an old bed, ate simple meals, wore worn clothes, all disguises so that no one could recognize me, so greedy eyes could no longer pry. I knew I had to relearn everything, mastering technology to manage the dentist fund discreetly, understanding contracts, legal procedures, and above all, concealing my intentions. On the first day, I studied, not at prestigious schools, but through short-term courses, free legal consultations, and financial support groups for the elderly reintegrating into society.
I listened intently, took careful notes, asked precise questions like a diligent student. I learned to read clauses, analyze transactions, verify numerical traces on documents. Each new skill became a stitch in my armor. I knew that to win legally, I had to know the rules inside out, not rely on emotion or past memories. Alongside legal knowledge, I deliberately sought humble work, volunteering at a small church, helping at a morning cafe, assisting a discreet, wealthy family. These jobs hid me in plain sight and provided something invaluable: information. People confided their grievances in the cafe, neighbors whispered, and sometimes life offered me fragments. A real estate agent seen at my home, a strange document moved at midnight. I listened, collected, and noted every piece in a small notebook, always at my side. Rebirth was more than learning. It was sharpening body and mind. Each morning, I walked along the beach, letting waves wash away old sighs and replace them with steady breaths. I practiced retelling my life story to new acquaintances, not to complain, but to master persuasion and observation. I learned to restrain weakness, turn tears into drive, and day by day, the pitiful mother mask was replaced with a calm, strategic, and purposeful exterior. In the solitude of night, I never forgot the steps I had prepared. Verifying all assets in the dentist fund, secretly contacting lawyers to ensure documents were securely sealed, setting up safe channels to back up evidence, both physical and digital. I even created anonymous accounts to store scans of the diary, photos, and the original will. Everything had contingencies. No errors were allowed. Leaving was not escape, but a tactical retreat to prepare decisive action. Some nights, loneliness pressed hard. I wanted to call Brian, to confide, to lean on a familiar shoulder, but I knew each contact risked exposure. I wrote imaginary journal entries to my husband, chronicling my moves, the pain of betrayal, and my resolve not to let all vanish. These pages were vows, a tonic to keep my heart from softening. Time passed and I felt transformed. The old house in memory remained, but I returned with a new vision. I no longer waited for opportunity. I created it. When I prepared to return, I was no longer the sentimental figure in family photos. I was a small, patient, and cold strategist, having learned,
accumulated, and cloaked everything in feigned humility. They would think I had rested, but when the time came, they would see that their mother did not merely return home. She would surge like a wave, sweeping away everything power and greed had built on lies. And in the dawn light filtering through my tiny rented room, I rose, looked in the mirror, and painted a smile no one would recognize as false.
I reviewed the checklist, confirming the dentist fund, contacting witnesses, gathering more clues about Elena and Daniel.
The gone to rest note still lay on the villa table, and in their eyes, I had truly disappeared. But I, their mother, had chosen silence to be reborn, to become stronger, wiser, and to wait for the day I would repay with intellect rather than screams.
After months away, I had vanished from Elena and Daniel's sight like a ghost without a trace. The gone to rest note convinced them that I had abandoned the house, that it was now their prize. At first, their exuberance made me smile quietly in the shadows. Elena bounding up the stairs, describing plans to sell precious items, while Daniel sneaked through documents, calculating how to divide the spoils as if the world belonged solely to them. They had no idea that every step was under my watchful eyes, every raised brow, every feigned smile carefully noted. Day by day, their masks of kindness and filial duty. The villa, once warm with family memories, had grown cold, dilapidated. Rusted tiles, peeling walls, creaking doors, all whispered alongside the reports I collected from the broker. These traces mirrored Elena and Daniel's rotting souls under greed's weight, reminding that material possession can never mask true nature, that every scheme leaves marks. They began selling old items I had cherished, unaware that the true assets, the original will, property, and the dentist fund, were securely guarded by me. Their eager glances as they signed papers, met with brokers, and discussed the house sale became a silent symphony of my private satisfaction. Every gesture, every sound revealed their ambition and mistakes. I learned every detail through discreet sources, silent neighbors, and emails and calls I had set to monitor. Each fragment became a pin, weaving a net to compel them to face the truth. The once warm villa now reflected their true selves, greedy, selfish, petty. Without me, they were blind, self-destructive. Every decision, selling, signing, petty fights, followed a path I had long anticipated. They did not know I had honed my observation, memorized every detail, and was ready to step in for the decisive move. From afar, I felt each fear, tear, and flare of anger. I watched Elena and Daniel turn. Without me, they revealed their true faces. And those faces would allow me to close this family game with intellect, not force. What they thought was victory had become a trap, and I, the forgotten mother, was preparing for the decisive phase, where Elena and Daniel would confront themselves and the selfish choices made in darkness. The villa, once a witness to love, now reflected every sin and ambition. And I, with a heart cold as steel and sharp intellect, continued my silent vigil, awaiting the moment to step in, not to save them, but to teach them the lesson they deserved. The house's calm was now a facade. After months of hiding and watching, the villa now stood like a derelict ship adrift at sea, outwardly decayed, inwardly filled with the remnants of relationships long dead. Elena and Daniel, caught in their petty struggle, failed to see the simple yet decisive truth. The true value wasn't in the antique guitar or the family painting they hurriedly sold, but in legal ownership, in the original documents, in who truly held power. They thought they were free, yet they danced unknowingly on a stage I had meticulously written, directed, and from which I silently awaited the final applause. Returning was not rushed. Every step was carefully prepared, like orchestrating the perfect reversal. I bought a new scarf, changed my hairstyle, refined my posture, and most importantly, I crafted a new identity. Linda. This name was no trivial ruse.
It was a mask sewn with legal precision, money routed through the dentist fund, and the connections I had quietly nurtured during my absence.
As Linda, I appeared as an independent, composed, wealthy woman. Someone Elena and Daniel would never associate with their frail, aging mother. I operated entirely through intermediaries, lawyers, brokers, and real estate contacts I had secretly cultivated. They knew who I was, yet they only saw Linda, a name on a contract, a signature on a check, a stack of fully stamped documents. The dentist fund remained behind the scenes, but the heart of the plan was secrecy. Every transaction cloaked in layers of procedure, so greedy children like Elena and Daniel could not realize they were selling their mother's home back to her own hands. They only saw a faceless buyer, an outsider, a client, eager to pay top dollar. The auction day dawned gray and windy, the sea breeze cold with irony. Elena and Daniel arrived, faces bright with anticipation of quick profit from assets they presumed theirs. They didn't recognize that across the table, signing papers and controlling the fate of the house was their mother, under another name. I sat among the crowd, sunglasses on, a scarf around my shoulders, a VIP ticket arranged by the lawyer. They looked past me, never questioning, absorbed in their negotiations and self-satisfaction. That arrogance made me smile quietly. The auction unfolded like the play I had scripted in my mind. Calls for bids, hammer strikes, sighs of losers, cheers of winners. When the price exceeded what they imagined would secure victory, I raised my hand, quietly, subtly, placing a bid that made the broker double-check. Elena froze. Daniel frowned. They did not understand why an outsider was so determined. Little did they know the funds were ready in the dentist fund, legally guaranteed, ensuring I would regain the house in a manner both sophisticated and indisputable. When the hammer fell for the last time, the new buyer appeared, Linda M. Holloway.
A stranger to the family, yet legally the rightful owner. Elena gaped, Daniel stepped back, a wind of unfamiliarity stirring their plan. I approached the signing table, signed with deliberate calm, witnessing a victory without fanfare. No shouting, no warnings, only legal acknowledgement of ownership. After completing the paperwork, I had someone deliver a box of documents, took the keys, and left the auction room. Elena and Daniel rushed after me, pleading, offering double, triple the price. I only shook my head, silent. They didn't recognize the tone, the matured, measured voice. They did not see the eyes that had once been theirs. In that moment, I felt the old pain surge, wrapped now in a sense of serenity, knowing everything was unfolding according to plan. Returning to the villa late in the afternoon, I walked through the gate as its new owner, entering the living room where my name had once echoed in laughter. Elena and Daniel froze, realizing the house belonged to a stranger. They glanced around, scrutinizing details, then each other, searching for clues. Then their eyes met mine, not in recognition, but in suspicion. Elena whispered, "We know. Who are you?" Daniel stepped closer. "How could you buy this house?" I looked at them, voice firm and resolute as stone. "My name is Linda. I bought it to preserve the memories. They could not comprehend, could not believe, and I, under my new name, stepped into my home as a stranger, ready for confrontations they could not yet imagine. In that quiet moment, I understood that victory wasn't revenge through yelling. It was letting the betrayers see justice with their own eyes, powerless to change it. The house was mine again. But I did not return as the frail mother I turned, stood tall, eyes on the sea, knowing the rest of the plan. Forcing Elena and Daniel to confront their own greed was only just beginning. The distance between me and Elena Daniel was now nothing but a thick pane of glass. Yet that glass was more than a physical barrier. It was an invisible veil, keeping them from seeing the truth I had been hiding for months. When I stepped into the auction hall, every sense sharpened. The hammer's rap, the calls for bids, the murmurs of investors, all became the background rhythm for the drama I had long staged. I stood behind the glass, a silent figure, watching my two children, Elena with eager eyes, Daniel with a tense expression, battling over the things they believed would bring them victory. They argued, voices cracking around their spiteful words, but I knew they were utterly blind. The truth was standing right behind them, and they did not realize it. Every motion, every gesture of theirs became a fragment of my private delight.
Elena gripped the signing pen, ready to dash through contracts.
Daniel kept glancing at his notebook, calculating numbers. Yet neither noticed that I, Linda, was indirectly controlling those figures through the Dennis Fund. A sense of satisfaction rose within me. After years of enduring coldness, betrayal, and vile plots, at last I could stand outside it all, observe, and let them reveal their true selves without any warning from me. The final hammer fell, drowning their fragile hopes. The house was sold, the contract signed, but this time the winner was me, not by force or words, but by intelligence, patience, and a silent strategy they never suspected. I walked to the signing table, set my pen down, and signed with calm, razor-sharp deliberation. Each stroke of my signature felt like a full stop on many years of betrayal, on the silence I had maintained, on endless nights spent plotting revenge that preserved my dignity.
The broker looked at me with curious eyes, unaware that Linda Ann Holloway was the very mother they had abandoned, the woman who had borne so much pain and yet still stood firm. Elena and Daniel stood there, hesitant, still not comprehending what had happened. They stared at the contract, at one another, slowly recognizing the hole in their strategy, the gap I had filled perfectly from afar, during months of quietly funding and watching. In that moment, I did not rush to reveal my identity. I stood silently, watching my children flounder in the whirlpool of greed and regret. Every tear, every quarrel, every scheme became a quiet reward for my patience. I sighed, both relief and confirmation. My long efforts had not been in vain. And in that fleeting smile, I sensed a new power, the power of the forsaken mother who had returned, strong, subtle, and immovable. From behind that glass, I watched Elena and Daniel unravel bit by bit.
The turmoil and rage faded, replaced by confusion and disappointment. They realized that every move, every action over the months had been steered by me, without their knowledge. And I, standing quietly with no hurry, savored the satisfaction of a victor who had endured years of suffering, knowing this silent revenge was the most perfect. No spectacle, no brutality, only intellect and calmness, things they would never possess. When the auction ended, I slipped out quietly, leaving Elena and Daniel amid the chaos, staring at the contract they had expected to win, now belonging to the stranger. But I knew that in their minds, the image of their mother still flickered. A ghost they had once abandoned, now returned, powerful, decisive, and unshakable. And from that retreating silhouette, my smile surfaced briefly. A final affirmation: every pain, every endurance, every betrayal would at last be paid for. I had won, not with violence, but with the terrifying patience and intellect of a mother once forsaken. That night, after the auction, I didn't flaunt my victory. I let Elena and Daniel drown in the chaos, and I knew the next act had to move to a different rhythm. Slow, subtle, and infinitely more painful for the two children who had abandoned me. I decided to invite them to dinner with the new owner, a seemingly ordinary meal, but in truth, the perfect stage for the moment they would have to face the truth. Every detail was calculated. A long dining table, warm yet cool candlelight, delicate dishes, all meant to create intimacy while applying psychological pressure. I wanted them to feel clearly that the mother they had once forgotten, the woman they thought weak and helpless,
had become an undeniable power. When Elena and Daniel entered the room, their eyes were curious and edged with arrogance. They looked around, trying to figure out who the new owner might be, not realizing that the figure standing before them was the ghost of the past they had scorned.
I smiled faintly, keeping my composure. In a voice soft but razor sharp, I greeted them. "Please, sit down and enjoy your dinner." They had no suspicion. They assumed they were facing a city homeowner, a stylish, independent businesswoman, never imagining that this figure had once been everything to them, their mother, the one who built this house, the one who sacrificed her life silently. The dinner began in an initial hush. Elena smiled politely. Daniel stared at the food, trying to control the situation but betraying his nervousness. I let them steer the conversation, letting them continue to reveal their nature. Their words, gestures, and looks all reflected the greed and selfishness they had hidden. I sat quietly, observing every detail, every reaction, every phrase, committing it all to memory to savor the long-awaited satisfaction. Then the decisive moment arrived. I stood up and walked to the center of the room, looking them squarely in the eye, my tone calm yet commanding. "You've forgotten who built this house." Elena and Daniel froze. They looked at me, at each other, then back at me. It was as if the world crumbled beneath their feet. Panic filled their eyes, brows knitted, hands trembling. The portrait of disappointment and dawning guilt they could not escape. There were no screams, no scolding, no violence. Only the silence of someone who has endured, paired with a cold, composed reminder. I did not lose my temper, because anger would diminish my authority. Instead, I allowed them to see the truth in their own stunned and confused faces. They realized that every scheme and calculation they had made had been overturned by the very person they had once belittled, and that they had walked willingly into the trap I set for them. The moment stretched, as if time itself had paused. Elena tried to form words, but the sound choked in her throat. Daniel, once so confident, stood motionless, staring at my hands. Hands that had cared for and loved them, hands they had dismissed. I moved slowly, each step deliberate, letting them feel the strong presence of their mother. Not the frail woman they remembered, but Linda, the woman reborn, stronger, calmer, and full of authority. Everything became silent, taut as a plucked string. I let my gaze sweep over their reactions, knowing this dinner was not merely a meal, but a lesson. The most refined revenge. No shouting, no violence, only the presence, intelligence, and authority of the woman they had forgotten and who had now returned with absolute power. As they sat back down, searching for excuses, I remained quiet, allowing the shock to sink deeper. I knew this late realization would be etched into their minds, that every greedy, selfish act has its price. And I, the mother once abandoned, now returned to walk among candlelight and the horrified faces of my two children, relished the greatest satisfaction. A revenge that was subtle, slow, and perfect. After the evening filled with hidden meanings, Elena sank to the floor, tears streaming down her cheeks. She had no words left to justify herself, no trace of her former self-satisfied gaze or cunning schemes. Now, there was only regret and emptiness. Daniel stood by the door, his face rigid, hands trembling as he opened it to step outside, as if wanting to escape the truth but unsure where to flee. The house, once the epicenter of every plot and calculation, had become frighteningly silent. I stood there, feeling an unusual emptiness, free of resentment, free of anger, only a lingering sorrow for the lost years, the years I had sacrificed, loved, and given everything, only to be met in return with betrayal and deceit. But I was not furious or out of control. I had learned that revenge does not require violence or shouting. Revenge could be calm, a way for the greedy to see their true nature. I walked around the house, touching every wall, every window frame, every object they thought they owned, and realized that this house was not just property. It was a testament to love, sacrifice, and the loneliness I had endured. And now, I wanted to turn it into something truly meaningful, not just for me, but for others, for those who had quietly endured as I had, widows, nurses, those who had given so much without recognition. I sat down at the table and opened the papers of the Dennis Fund, the fund I had secretly established during my disappearance. Every word, every line had been meticulously prepared. The legal procedures, the support funds, the projects helping women rebuild their lives, learn new skills, and regain faith after loss. As I placed my pen on the paper, I felt a profound sense of liberation, as if all resentment had been transformed into meaningful action.
Elena looked at me, sobbing, and perhaps in that moment she realized that all ambitions, all schemes were meaningless in the face of a mother's wisdom and compassion. Daniel, who had once eagerly sought to claim everything, now left silently, his face full of disappointment and regret, as if he understood that no one could buy back lost time or sacrifice devotion. I walked down the hallway, running my fingers over old photographs of myself, my husband, our 2 children. They reminded me of the past, of memories once sweet but tainted by greed. Now I chose to forgive myself and them, not because they deserved it, but because I deserved peace. This forgiveness was not weakness. It was proof of the inner strength I had honed through years of solitude, loss, and suffering. I ascended to the 2nd floor, looking down at the living room where Elena and Daniel had once argued, and smiled softly.
The house had returned to where it truly belonged, no longer dominated by selfishness, but a place that would continue to offer opportunity, hope, and life to those in need. The Dennis Fund was now a living part of the house, a symbol of justice, of compassion, and of the ability to transform pain into meaningful action. In that silent moment, I realized that perfect revenge is not about hurting others, but about turning pain, betrayal, and injustice into a new power. I finished signing, set the pen down, and stood looking out at the sea, the wind blowing through my hair, carrying the salty tang and the sound of the waves. Deep inside, I knew Elena and Daniel would never forget this lesson. But more importantly, I, once abandoned, once suffering to the extreme, had freed myself and returned this world to those worthy of it.
Every tear, every cry, every selfish act was now just a memory, while I, strong, composed, free, was ready to step into the next chapter of my life, with a heart light yet full of strength. After signing the papers, handing over the house to the Dennis Fund, and witnessing Elena sobbing uncontrollably while Daniel left in silence, I stepped out to the large window of the villa, where the afternoon light poured in, illuminating the old walls that now contained a completely different energy, an energy of justice, wisdom, and freedom. No longer were there plots, calculations, or the shadows of betrayal. Only the serenity I had long awaited remained. I sat down quietly, my eyes tracing the vast blue ocean, the waves rhythmically lapping the shore, reminding me that all misfortunes, all suffering, eventually drift away with the passage of time. My heart was no longer heavy with resentment or the weight of years abandoned. The painful memories, betrayal, selfishness, the cunning schemes of Elena and Daniel were now nothing more than a thin layer of sand covering the beach of my life's recollections. I smiled, not out of glee, but because I realized that perfect revenge is not about hurting others, but about reclaiming control of one's life with intellect and composure. Every step, every quiet action, every steadfast decision had led me to this moment, where I could sit peacefully, listen to the waves, breathe in the salty air, and feel the freedom I truly deserved. The house still stood, steadfast, yet it had become a symbol of a new journey, the rebirth of a mother once abandoned, of a woman who had learned to turn pain into strength. I recalled every sleepless night, every tear shed in solitude, every moment of despair upon realizing the schemes swirling around me. Now all of it had passed, dissolving like waves crashing upon the shore, reminding me that time is the best healer, but wisdom and patience are what truly allow us to conquer life. I thought of Elena and Daniel, the two children who had pierced my heart with greed and betrayal.
They had learned their lesson, not from anger or punishment, but from the strong, composed, and wise presence of a mother who had learned to stand tall. I no longer needed them to acknowledge their mistakes or seek forgiveness. I had forgiven myself, liberated from the past, and returned the world to values that truly mattered: love, compassion, and justice. The night sea lulled me, the moonlight reflecting on the water, creating a strangely serene scene. I sat quietly, letting every sound, every rhythm of the waves merge with my own breathing, savoring each moment of freedom. No plans of revenge, no schemes or machinations remained. Only I remained, the mother, the woman, the one who had lived, suffered, and lost, yet had now found her true self. In that silence, I realized that life does not have to be a constant battle. Sometimes the greatest victory is learning to let go, to watch events pass by, and to hold on to wisdom, patience, and serenity. The years of suffering, betrayal, and loneliness had now become a solid foundation for a new life, one in which I was free, strong, and complete. I closed my eyes, letting the sea breeze caress my face, listening to the waves whisper a gentle symphony of healing, knowing that from this moment on, every next chapter of my life would be written with wisdom, compassion, and calm, not with tears or violence. I had reclaimed my freedom, not by defeating others, but by conquering the darkness within myself. And in that moment, I smiled, gazing out at the sea, knowing that I had truly returned, stronger, serene, and freer than ever before. After months of sitting silently by the window, listening to the waves whisper and feeling tranquility seep into each beat of my heart, I knew the time had come to turn all those experiences, that pain, and the wisdom accumulated over the years into something truly meaningful. No more resentment, no more revenge. Everything had become a lesson about life, about the power of intelligence, patience, and compassion. I decided to expand the Dennis Fund, a place where I would help women who had once gone astray, who had been abandoned, who had suffered losses as I had. I wanted those who once felt weak, alone, or helpless to have a chance to regain faith, relearn skills, and rebuild their lives, not by depending on others, but through their own strength and intellect. I decorated the Dennis Fund office simply but warmly. On the large wall, I hung an old photograph, me, my husband, and our two children when they were small. A beautiful memory, but also a reminder of what was lost, what I once sacrificed, and what I had reclaimed with intelligence and patience. Each time I looked at that photo, I smiled, but the smile no longer mixed with tears or bitterness. It was the smile of someone who had risen, who had learned to turn pain into motivation, to transform betrayal and disappointment into strength that spreads goodwill. I welcomed each woman who entered the fund with worried eyes and trembling hands, but hearts full of hope. I listened as they told me of losses, of years abandoned, of relatives who betrayed or walked away. I saw myself in every story, in every tear, and I knew their paths could become gentler, stronger if they received timely guidance and support. I helped them not only materially, but spiritually, so they could realize that survival and success lie in their own hands, not in the greed or selfishness of others. Day by day, the Dennis Fund grew, with smiles gradually appearing on the faces of women who had once suffered. I watched them regain confidence, find joy in small actions, take bold steps, and make independent choices. Inside me, I felt a peace deeper than ever. The years of solitude, the scheming of my children, the plots to seize the estate, all had become mere shadows of the past. I did not need their recognition or apologies, because I had found justice in my own way. One afternoon, I stood by the office window,
watching the light stream through the glass, fall upon the old photograph, and smiled. All tragedies and suffering had been closed fully, not by direct revenge, but by turning pain into meaningful action.
The Dennis Fund became a living testament that a woman's true power does not lie in dominance or control over others, but in the ability to be reborn, to make a difference, and to spread hope to those around her. I recalled everything that had happened, the plots, the betrayals, the loneliness, the years of endurance, and the quiet tears. Now, all were dead. Now, all were distilled into a single message. Strength, wisdom, and compassion can turn any tragedy into a life worth living. I walked through the office, watching people work, offering them advice, smiles, and encouragement. A profound peace filled me. No more resentment, no more fear. I, the mother once abandoned, once in pain, once betrayed, now truly stood firm, opening a new chapter of life free from the darkness of the past, filled instead with the light of serenity and hope. And so, the final chapter of the tragedy closed.
I smiled at the old photograph, looked at each woman finding light in her life, and realized that life, even when painful or betrayed, can become whole if one knows how to turn pain into strength, to make the past a foundation, and to give genuine value back to the world. I had reclaimed my life, not with violence, not with anger, but with wisdom, compassion, and calm. And that was the most delicate, perfect, and everlasting revenge.